Thank you. Wow. All right, welcome. Thank you so very much. I want to thank Dylan and all the Hack in the Box crew that are here. It's going to be an amazing 2 days of sessions. We have some amazing speakers. I'm absolutely humbled to actually be able to take the stage, especially first. So you guys get it over with first. But you have some really amazing sessions. And so with that, we have also some amazing co-keynoters for the next 2 days as well. Thank you very much. But I'm ready to have a really good time with you guys this morning. So thank you for getting up this morning. Thank you guys who are having coffee, tea, milk, or water, or vodka, whatever it might be. So to kind of kick things off, and I'm told I can only walk to here, so this will be fun. My talk is more around I fight for the users, and it's a prequel because we've done a few of these talks before in a Star Wars type fashion. The prequel should lead up to actually what the actual talks end up being about. I wanted to have a little bit of fun with this, and I'm hoping that this translates pretty well as far as a lot of this talk is going to be a little bit about Western cinema and how funny hacking is in Western cinema. So, who am I? I'm Sec Barbie on Twitter. My name's Erin Jacobs, is my real life name, as some of you people like to know, because when I introduce myself as Sec Barbie in bars, it sounds really strange. But as we like to go through credentials, so I'm a consultant turned director of information security, turned chief security officer, turned chief information officer at one point in my life. I did that for about 7 years. And then I decided going back to consulting was the logical step, right? So kind of with that goes through my entire career. I started in consulting, saw a lot of organizations, saw a lot of the good, the bad, the ugly of what people were doing in security. I had the opportunity to go in as the director of information security and actually build a program. And then that's when I was able to kind of traverse that into chief security officer. And good or bad, as a chief security officer, they actually decided I would be a better fit for the chief information officer, which was a cool thing, because as a chief information officer, as many of you might know, a lot of times they're detached from security. A lot of times the security department feeds into them. So it was kind of neat to have an organization where I got to push security from the top down. But as good things often come to an end, going back into consulting seemed like the more logical way that I could make a larger impact. But that all sounds fine and good, but that doesn't have a whole lot of relevance to this talk. So as far as the credentials that are important for this talk, it has to do with me being about a 13-year-old little girl and starting as a sysop of a BBS. And that's how a lot of us got our start. You know, I was a little bit of an insecure little girl. Didn't have a whole lot of friends because I was a computer nerd, and that wasn't very popular for little girls back in the 80s. But one of the things that was kind of important to me was this really silly movie that was made. Has anyone in this room even seen Space Camp, aside from the front row? Okay. All right, so I'm going to try to explain this in the best way I can. Space Camp is a horrible movie, especially because I rewatched it in prepping for this talk, and I probably hadn't watched it for like 15 years at least. It's awful. I'm really sorry. Don't go watch it. Unless you have like some time to kill on a plane, then fine. But the cute part about this movie for me when I was a wee little girl is that I wanted to be an astronaut. That's what I wanted to grow up and be. But in watching this movie, there's this little kid named Max. Max was the outcast. Max had no real friends. He was the young kid amongst a whole bunch of older teenagers in this space camp that was in Huntsville, Alabama. I kind of felt like Max because I was always the young kid. You know, I was a 13-year-old sysop of a BBS where I had people in their teens, 20s, and 30s dialing in. And I had this power over them, which was amazing. But I didn't exactly fit in. And it wasn't exactly socially acceptable for me to hang out with like 20-year-olds when I'm 13. Different story, different time. But when I was watching this movie, Max becomes friends with this little robot named Jinx. And that was his little buddy. So the cute thing about it is that it really resonated with me, with my computer side, with me wanting to be an astronaut, sitting up and trying to pretend to launch into space. This was like a pivotal movie for me. That being said, as I grew up, this lovely gentleman also became slightly important to my life. His name is Oscar Wilde, and he wrote an amazing essay called The Decay of Lying. And in The Decay of Lying, he basically talks about how life imitates art. So it was a different perception of how there are these beautiful untrue things, and that's really what art is. It's about creating these beautiful things that are fictitious. They're untrue, but they give you the believability. So when we're talking about this entire keynote and this talk and what I want you guys to take away from it, I'm going to walk back to my little space camp experience and go, this little robot Jinx tried to help out his friend. He hacked into the NASA computers to try to launch Max into space because that's what Max wanted to do. He wanted to go to space. So this little robot's hacking into the computers, and the robot was adorable because he's a lot like a lot of the hackers and a lot of us now, where we're curious, we're trying to do good, even though it might not be the good thing to do. So he didn't know any better, and he tried to help get Max into space. In the end of the movie, he actually ends up helping get Max back. Completely horrible storyline. But what makes this important is that date. 1986 in the US was a very important date for our whole space program. This movie was done with production in the beginning of 1986. In January 28, 1986, we had the first disaster in our space program, which was the Challenger disaster. This movie was released in June, already gone through production. But what actually happened in the movie, this was completely screenwritten. This was already done by the time this accident happened. They had a solid rocket booster malfunction in the movie. That's actually what happened with the Challenger when it exploded. It was a solid rocket booster problem. So it brings us to the whole, it's interesting how life imitates art, even when it's unintended. So as we go through and have a little bit of fun today, the TLDR of this whole situation is we need to work harder and faster to fight for the users. A lot of us here over the next 2 days are going to hear about exploits, about cool tools and things that we can do with technology. One of the things I want to think about, and I want everyone to kind of unify with, is understanding that we all are employed, we're all doing this for the greater good of society and for the users. So how do we take this information back, and how do we help fight for the users? So along the lines of fighting for the users and where this all comes from a movie, Tron, that was done in 1982. So Tron is amazing, being as that it was done in 1982. It has a gentleman named Flynn, who is this rogue programmer who he worked for this big company named Encom, and he made lots of games. Long story short about him is that he had a boss that basically stole all of his games, called them his own, and got him out of the system so that way he could get promoted, escalated all of this. So the cute thing about one of the programs that he wrote was this program named Tron. Tron was actually a security program. This is 1982. This is a security program that he wrote to be the checker of the checking. The master control program had no authority, no logging, no any of this over it. Tron is the one that was supposed to make sure that everybody was doing what they're supposed to. It was supposed to be the autonomous security program in 1982. So along those lines, oh, love my automation. There's a quote from Dr. Walter Gibbs, who in this movie was the older doctor who was the mentor type person. And he said, you know, wouldn't that be grand? Computers and the programs start thinking and the people will stop. Again, 1982. What I found amazing about this is that just this year, just a few weeks back, That's at DEF CON. That's the DARPA Grand Security Challenge. That's exactly what we just did a few weeks ago. We just had computers battle in a CTF against each other. Kind of interesting. So 5 words that probably changed a lot of our lives in different ways. You know, shall we play a game? As we're going through these movies and kind of fun little things, I found it really interesting in my research that Matthew Broderick, who's the star of this movie, actually, he couldn't really type when this movie was done. So any of the scenes that you see where he's typing, this is War Games, when he's typing, he just was really kind of faking it as best he could. He did a really good job, but he faked it. But there's a scene that I thought was amazing that I didn't catch until I watched it like for my 105th time. So he finds out, for those of you that have never seen War Games, he's trying to find this gaming Protovision, this game company. So he uses war dialing, tries to find this game company, comes up with all these games on this computer system that he's not sure what it is, takes it to his buddies, his other computer buddies, and they're talking about how to get into the system. And Matthew Broderick actually says, I don't believe any system is totally secure. And I was like, whoa, this is 1983, and whoever wrote that's amazing, because I will say that to this day. I'm sure everyone in this room will say that to this day. I mean, there really is no secure system aside from one that you unplug, right? Fair enough? So War Games taught us a ton. If you really break it down, I'm not going to pick on every single part of War Games, and I would love to pick on it with you guys later on today. But it taught us a ton about computers in a time that a lot of us, or a lot of people watching it, the general consumers, had no idea what a computer could do. It taught us about war dialing, about dialing like every number that a system could come up with in certain area codes. I mean, anyone ever used war dialing knows that, I mean, you can put a lot of different parameters in, small scope, large scope, whatnot. 2 rings, if it picks up, fine. If not, it moves on. You know, in fact, in my career, only recently have we stopped testing for a war dialing test. And still there's some people that still request it, but it's so rare. But this is now, 2016, and we're just now stopping war dialing. And, it taught us about security backdoors. Again, 1983. Pretty amazing stuff to think about when the general population didn't have computers, but they weren't exposed. At best, it was a dummy terminal. But what I found amazing about War Games is that War Games actually changed U.S. policy on computer system and fraud. And at the time, Ronald Reagan was the president of the U.S., and he actually watched War Games at Camp David, and he started asking questions, and that's how these policies started to come up. I mean, so a movie actually influenced U.S. policy in 1983. Another kind of cool thing that happened out of it, which I thought was hilarious, is anyone who's ever seen War Games has seen this amazing picture of NORAD. It has all these screens and beautifulness. At the time when people were going and touring NORAD, they were really kind of upset because they're like, well, where's the computers? Where's the real screens? So it actually caused them to upgrade their systems not once, but twice. The more recent one was in 2003. So kind of interesting. Another area where, movies kind of pushed our progress. The art pushed the life. Now I'm going to pull an obscure one out for you guys. And even in most audiences won't even understand this, but I'm going to give you a little quick intro as to what this is. This is another one of those horrible movies from the 80s, because clearly we know what my lonely life was in the 80s as a little kid. But this was Daryl, which was data analyzing robot youth life form. It's this really weird ET extraterrestrial kind of show. Again, this little computer, half human kid. I'm only pulling this out because I found this part, I love this. When I was watching this as a kid. I'm like, this is so cool. This kid makes an ATM, increase the dad's amount of money that he has in his account. Kid was doing ATM hacking in 1985, which there's a talk later today about that as well. But I wanted to definitely say, from 1985 to 2010, when Barnaby Jack did his jackpotting of ATMs, this is, again, life is imitating art here. By and far, I need to know, has anyone seen the movie Sneakers? Okay, yay, we have some. Okay, I'll explain this to you like I explained this to my father, because this is the only movie that allows me to explain what I do for a living to my father, and he still sits and goes, I don't get it. He asked me this a week ago, too. So Sneakers is kind of this cool little movie that had River Phoenix in it, which I'm really upset that he's now passed away because he was going to be my husband. But it was this movie about a security consulting firm, basically, in 1992. It had these guys that went and broke into companies on behalf of the companies. So you had, Dan Aykroyd, had all these famous American actors breaking into these companies. How the story starts out is it has Robert Redford starting out with his partner, and they're doing basically hacktivism in the very first scenes of this movie. They're taking money from bank accounts and transferring them into charities. So the very early ideas of hacktivism were actually introduced in this movie. There's a lot of other concepts that were introduced, but the most important one that I felt you really see, especially in this scene, is when they realize how important cryptography is. This whole movie is based around stealing back this chip that can decrypt everything, this master algorithm. So, and his former partner is now working for organized crime, and they're trying to keep it away from the government. This just happened not too long ago with Apple, where Apple actually took a very firm stop and said, we're not going to give a backdoor to governments. We are going to stand strong. And shortly after this was just February of this year, they hired back some of the most amazing crypto minds that there are out there to, again, further secure their platform. And this isn't an Apple ad. This is just more, this is amazing that these people are noting that this is important. For good measure, I have to add Jurassic Park. So 1993, we have Jurassic Park, which I thought was an interesting time for computers, IT departments. And this is nerdy. And as much as they got Dennis Nerdy, they got a lot of it right. They gave him a horrible last name. Thank you very much. They gave him Jolt Cola, which is what they thought everybody drank, which I think everybody tried to drink, which is what it was. But this, too, gave us an important insight as to how we're doing things right or wrong. This gentleman was the one-man IT department. He was the only guy with the keys to the castle. And around the time in the movie where we get introduced to him, he's not feeling very valued. He's kind of going to stick it to Mr. Harmon and steal the embryo eggs and run off the island with them to give them to a competitor because he's not feeling super valued. So this is the way that a lot of small and mid-sized companies, this is their world in the 1990s. I mean, coming up through IT back in those days, people weren't investing a lot of money. It's a very interesting time for us now in security because I think we're starting to feel those pains in security where we're now changing from 1 to 5 person security shops for mid-sized business and growing into a more developed department, a more respected field. Back in the 90s, pre-Y2K, we were just the people that were turning on the computers and making sure that they did what they needed to do for people. We were the nerdy people, with our glasses that walked up and said, move, let me fix that for you. So as we know, we have so much failure when it comes to Jurassic Park. We have AppSec failure. We have code review failure. We have separation of duties failure. I mean, we could go on in this movie. But the most important failure I think that we have is we have insider threat. this is where we really get introduced to why insiders, it's important to keep people happy, but to what degree? We have a 2008 incident in San Francisco where we had a network admin that went rogue and tried to hold the city hostage because he had the keys to the castle. Again, single points of failure. You know, does art necessarily, is life imitating art again? The interesting side note, this gentleman, Terry Childs, he's called a network kidnapper. The press had a great time with him. But as with a lot of misunderstood computer crimes, if you read the article and see how many things they tried to pretend that he could do, it was amazing and also quite scary. This leads me to our favorite one. Again, I'm going to take an audience poll again for those of you awake. Anyone seen the movie Hackers? A few more people, because you're in this field. If you're in this field, most people have at least been exposed to what this movie is. This movie was done in 1995. One of the cool things about this movie is one of the writers of the movie actually went to a 2600 meeting in New York. He actually met real hackers. He actually got a little exposure. So he actually had a few consultants that were hackers. So as much as they had to Hollywood this movie, they got a lot of things right and a lot of things just terribly, terribly wrong. But Hackers, the long story short of what the Hackers movie is, for those of you that haven't seen it, it's a story about a child hacker who basically got in trouble with the federal government about it, couldn't touch a computer for years, moves to New York with his parent, or his mom, gets involved with a little hacker circle, and ends up having one of the other kids hacks into a system, hacks the Gibson, and gets a hold of these garbage files, and they end up going through this entire movie, which is trying to clear this guy's name because all hackers are horrible people. So with that, this is the movie that started the idea for this talk. And it was more wrapped around this cute little scene where you have the director of security and then his security admin, who happens to be Penn, one of the magicians in the US. And they're talking about different things. They're talking about how God wouldn't be up so late because, of course, their CEO or COO, I believe it was, that's what their username was God, because, of course. Then they go through a part towards the end of the movie where all the hackers come together and are attacking the system so they can get in and get the evidence to clear the guy's name. And they said something super interesting. They said, this is the workload of at least, 7 users. That was the pivotal point for me that I went, this is funny. In 1995, they have system logging and SIMs deployed that could actually tell them the workload of so many users at that point in time. I work with enterprise companies and Fortune 50s that don't have the ability to pinpoint that much. And this is 2016. We're not quite there yet. But it brings to light a few other interesting concepts back in 1995. It teaches us a little bit about DDoS attacks. It teaches us about access controls. Goes through strong users and passwords. Don't use God, don't use love, don't use all those things that he likes to garble off. But it also teaches you about malicious insiders. Again, we're starting to see a reoccurrence of certain themes. The gentleman, the director of security, created this virus in this movie that is supposed to sink the tankers if a certain amount of money isn't transferred into his account. So one of the other things we learned about in this movie, and the more comedic part, is I would love to find a system that is as graphical as this is. I mean, whenever hacking is made to look sexy, that's the movie you think of where you're flying through things. Not so much. So this is one of the more funny movies that we came across. I'm not a huge Italian Job fan, but there was 2 makings of Italian Job, but the more recent one has Seth Rogen is the computer hacker in it. in his part, he's supposed to be the gentleman who created Napster, the real Napster, all this information. But when it comes to the hacking in this movie, the cool thing about it is, this is 2003, and he's talking about hacking the traffic system in LA. So they're trying to follow these trucks where only one of the trucks has the money in it. He's gonna hack the traffic system so that way the truck goes exactly where he wants it to go. Insider threat, all this good stuff, right? We actually had this happen in 2007. We're shortening the gap to where art or life is imitating art. Only 4 years to the real attack, we actually had where the engineers in LA who kind of built the system for the traffic control systems, they went on strike. So the logical thing that the management did to them is they took and they shut off all their user access. So the management went and shut off the user access to the people that designed the program. Sure, shutting off one username is going to really do a good job. No, they had about 1 million ways to get in if they needed to. And they probably very much regret it, but they did get in. They did cause pain in LA. They did cause congestion. They disrupted the traffic system in LA to make their point. So that made me think. After I've told you guys all of this about all these different movies, all these kind of cute little things that we can derive from how life is imitating art, that made me sit and go, what if? Well, a little bit about me is that not only do I like hacking, I like technology, I love what I do for a living, I have a really, really bad addiction that has cost me a lot of money over the years. I'm admitting this to you. So my addiction is I really love cars. I have spent so much money on cars, it's ridiculous. I don't have a Ferrari, but I was like, there's a movie with somebody stealing a Ferrari in it. What if? So in Gone in 60 Seconds, they are about these car thieves that are ultimately doing these things, stealing cars, again, to try to save the one gentleman's little brother from getting killed. But more the point that I took away from the movie is how cool the technology they used in stealing these cars was. And for those of you that have seen the movie Hackers, we were first introduced to Angelina Jolie back in Hackers. And so I often like to channel my inner Angelina Jolie. So this is her from that movie, and she is a pretty amazing car thief, for lack of a better word. And I went, if I was Angelina, and I needed to break into a warehouse with some Ferraris, what would I need to know? Well, the first thing I need to know is how for them not to see my face. So in doing this, I decided to take a look at wireless CCTV cameras. So in doing a little bit of research, and this is where the movie stuff is amazing, but this is where what we do for a living becomes not as sexy, but important. I went and said, okay, what do I need to know about camera systems in order to break into my warehouse and steal me a Ferrari? So I need to know, what the offline time is of that camera. I need to know if I bump it offline, how long until it notifies you? Does it notify you? I need to know if there's any cached video, if anything's on the onboard video is going to store, and when it comes back on the network, is it going to dump? I need to know any wired options. I need to understand and profile what I'm actually getting into here. Because I'm only going to go after the warehouses with the Ferraris that have wireless cameras, because wired's a little bit more complicated. I'm also going to talk about the type of power it has. Is it battery or is it wired? Remember that. We're going to talk about that in 2 seconds. And then any additional information that it needs, anything it needs to function. Does it need a base station? What does it need? And just generally, what other performance observations I can find. So in doing this little experiment, I decided to have a little diversity in it. I didn't want to just test one kind of camera, one shape camera, one color camera. I wanted to test as many cameras on the market as I could find. So I took about 10 cameras and I said, okay, let's test each and every one of you. Let's figure out if I'm going to find a warehouse with Ferraris that have a camera, I need to know which ones to go after. The long and short of the test, simple, normal methodology. Stopwatch starts at 0, 1 minute. I start the targeted DAuth. I'm not getting a whole lot into the DAuth. I mean, you can get Kali, you can run your own DAuths. I can explain to you more later. But for the purpose of this, I did a targeted DAuth against the cameras. I scanned, found their MAC address, did a targeted DAuth against each individual camera. 30 seconds or so, I did a hand wave for those that will only wake upon motion. And then at about 11 minutes, I stopped the DAuth and I gave it another 5 minutes to do a recovery to see when it comes back online, if it comes back online, anything of the above. So, as we kind of talked in the beginning about my lonely childhood where I didn't talk to many people, well, my adult childhood has not changed a whole lot because I spent like 2 weeks just doing this stuff because that's how much fun I get to have in my spare time. So this is the setup for any of you that want to have fun and reproduce a little wireless camera attack. So I used one iPad as the timer, which doesn't show very well, test camera, another iPad with the app on it to show the test camera on a different network, so that way I'm not de-authing the same network and causing myself a lot of problems. And obviously, good old Kali doing the dump. So, of course, I like to show my work. I'm not going to show all my work, but this is my super duper fast version of the demo where you get to see, woo, the work was shown. You see my hand going in. And if I let this play for a little while, you actually see different times of different days that this occurs on, but I will not totally bore you with that. Let's go to one more camera at least. So, that being said, you get the idea. So now what do I do with this data? So one of the cool things that I noticed, and it's part of a tool that I've been building, is I call it the Get Off My Lawn. So it's just a targeted DAuth tool. And what you can do with it is you can actually put the first 6 of any MAC address, do a simple Google, figure out what the provider is, who makes the camera. And so why is that information important? Why do I care? I care because I'm taking my big Pringles van and doing some war driving like we talked about way back in the first movie. So in doing the war driving, you can just simply find out who has what camera. So I'm going to go around to every Ferrari warehouse that I know of and figure out who has the cameras that I know how to knock off the network. Some are really nice. Some actually give you little stickers that say, you're on camera. So once I get all this lovely information, you go, Erin, okay, fine, you get in the warehouse. What about the cars? How are you going to get the keys to the cars? Yeah, no worries. This guy has it covered for me. In 2015, he was nice enough to figure out how to do the remote keyless system entry for the cars. That was very nice of him. So that being said, I've now been able to go through, drive around to my Ferrari warehouses, find the Ferrari dealership that has the cameras I need, and go take my Ferrari. You all say at 9:30 in the morning, who cares? Who cares about this? I care about the cameras because these cameras are saying they're security cameras. I have a problem with that. I am fine with you calling a camera a web camera. We're cool like that. Not when you're actually saying this camera is providing you any level of security. So when we talk about the security cameras, 5 cameras were tested. I want to show you how many are not being sold as a security camera. There we go. We have 2. We have the lovely D-Link and the Belkin are the 2 that aren't actually claiming to be security cameras. I applaud them. They say what they're doing. They're not claiming to protect you from anything, which is really interesting because out of all the cameras tested, the Belkin actually tested pretty much the best, even though it only did clips of video. To kind of go back a little bit, all these cool cameras are on the market in almost every marketplace around the world. the cute one is the Kuna, who I was fortunate enough at the last time that I talked about this. One of the gentlemen that works on the development team actually came up and told me one of the flaws that we identified is the fact that on this Kuna light, which is the light, on the bottom, it has these status lights. So picture this. You're putting this light out in front of your house. It's calling itself a security light, but it has these little status lights that actually tell you if it's offline and not recording. So as soon as you do a deauth attack on it, it goes offline. Funny thing about the deauth attack, if you run it for 10 minutes, it not only kicks it offline, it reboots the whole freaking thing to factory that you have to reset it up. Even better part about this, they know about this. They actually have it on the website and warn you. Okay, security camera that reboots after 10 minutes of no connectivity. No connectivity for 10 minutes. Where I live in the world, I get power outages, not frequently, but frequently enough that I don't want to reboot have to reset up a system every freaking time because I'm going to forget about it. I have a microwave light that blinks all the time in my house. So when it comes to other cameras and kind of things that are going on, some really cool ones, when I said earlier that we want to remember about the battery, who's using batteries versus wired connections. This little Netgear is adorable, and so is this Logi. Because the cool, cute thing about those two is they're magnets. So after I deauth them and go into my Ferrari warehouse, I'm just going to grab them, put them in my bag, and take off with them. I'm not even going to worry about putting them back online. Because, you know, I think you're going to notice that one of your Ferraris is gone. So you're not going to worry so much about the cameras. So the summary of issues, and I've talked about a few different things. Hopefully you guys have the coffee in you. You're up and ready for the next sessions of the day. The most important issue, going back to fighting for the users, is that we're still not solving the most basic of problems. We can watch in cinema basic problems and basic exploits being used against networks and against humans. We have some amazing talks today and tomorrow. How do we help empower our consumers, our users, because that's who we're working for, whether it's our family or people that are working in our organizations. How do we help them? So yeah, and about that whole that wireless CCTV camera thing, yeah, most of them can be blasted offline and not see or know anything. Almost every single one of them has a threshold for network interruption in them. And so it's not very hard. In fact, I'm going to pick on Canary because they're really good sports. Canary, if you bump it offline and you keep bringing it back online about every 5 minutes, but just for about 20 seconds, it will never notify you it was ever offline. So good and bad about just design and being able to adapt to network interference. So how do we help? We need to fight for the users. Again, let's go back. Let's take all the information that we're learning over the next 2 days. Let's think about how we can apply it. Let's get inspired. Let's get inspired to do more research. I think a lot of you are absolutely amazing, and I'll be in a lot of the sessions because I find what you're doing intriguing. And I think we all are trying to help for the common good and the common goal. So if we can take this message back, I think it'll be amazing. But one last item, when it comes to cinema and life imitating art, this talk wouldn't be complete unless I didn't make a little hat tip to Mr. Robot, the TV show on USA that most of you can stream and download. If you haven't, and you are into hacking and you're into information security, I highly suggest watching this. We have some really good security consultants that are working on this program. There's almost everything here is accurate. For the first time, we're seeing people getting things right. And we're not looking at it as being super sexy. We're looking at it as being actual threats and bringing it to the public eye. So definitely a hat tip to them. I can't wait to see what's up next. And that is all I have, folks. I hope you guys have a great Hack in the Box. Again, thank you to absolutely everybody. And I look forward to talking to you guys today. Again, I am Sec Barbie. The bits and presentations will be available online. And once I drop the slides to you guys, I also have citations for everything that I brought up. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.